Hope you had a chance to enjoy those logo design theory lessons, and now we're getting ready to hop into the practical side of things. But I wanted to have this introductory section because not everybody's going to come into this class with the same knowledge and skill set in Adobe Illustrator. So what I wanted to do is teach a couple of the main tools. There's about 5 or 6 main tools I'm going to use throughout this class, so that when we do get to the practical logo design section, things can go a lot quicker because you already know how the tools and the basic functions work. If you feel like you're already an intermediate to advanced level Adobe Illustrator user, or you feel like you're very comfortable with the tools that we're going to go over in this section, please feel free to skip this section. This is for those who really would like an overview of the tools we'll be using in the class. Before we get started with the rest of this course, I wanted to kind of show you how I set up my workspace and what workspace I use. You do not have to use the same workspace that I use, but just kind of showing you the one that I'm going to be using throughout the class. So I'm just going to go up to Window, I'm going to go ahead and click on Illustrator, go Window, Workspace, and I'm going to select Layout. So this is going to be the one I'll be using the most when doing my logo design work. So I have Layout selected, and then we also want to make sure we reset our workspace. So we go down to Workspace, and we are going to go down to Reset Layout, and it's going to go back to whatever is the default space setting for that. So I'm just kind of use some of these. I'm going to go ahead and keep them as is. There's going to be some that I'm going to be pulling out in the class and using more often, and we'll kind of get that throughout the class. But I just want to take a few minutes, kind of get our board set up, our workspace set up, so we have very similar layouts so you're not confused about certain windows. And some of you guys are very familiar with Adobe Illustrator. You're intermediate to advanced users. Fantastic, you're ahead of the game. But for those who are just still kind of in the beginning stages, maybe you've played around with the pen tool and the shapes tool, some very basic things. If there's ever a window option panel that you don't have available, you can always call it up by going up to Window and making sure you click on the one that maybe I'm referring to. So just if you don't see one on the right and we're talking about the appearance panel, let's go to Window, go ahead and load appearance, and you can stack these however you'd like. And so you can have different tabs and kind of arrange them however you feel like you're going to use them the most. And a lot of times throughout the class, my little cheat, I guess, to kind of speed up my workflow is I like to drag out windows so that if I'm really close to a certain area and I'm working right here, I'll have it very close by, so I don't have to go all the way over here to do options. So just don't hesitate to drag out windows and panels close by to your working space to kind of save you a little bit of time of having to dart all the way over here to the right each time. So just kind of a little hack there to save you some time. So now that we have our workspace set up, let's go ahead and get started with some kind of intermediate to beginner tools that I'm going to be using a lot when I'm creating logos together. So let's get started. So the first tool we're going to explore today is the width tool. It's right here. I'm going to zoom in so you can kind of see what that icon looks like. If you don't see any of the icons I talk about on the toolbar, make sure you go down to this little triple dot period kind of icon down here and go to Edit Toolbar. You'll be able to drag any of the tools available and really create your own custom toolbar however you'd like. So let's get started. I really love the width tool, very underestimated tool. In my tool belt the last couple years, I've just recently started really mastering it and using it. It's really helped with my logo design workflow and doing some things and speeding some things up. So the key to the width tool is you can't really do it with solid objects. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a solid object. I grab my width tool. You're not going to be able to do a whole lot. It needs to kind of be a stroke or a line. So let's go ahead and create a stroke and a line. We're just going to grab our pen tool, create a very simple kind of horizontal line. And so there's our horizontal line. Let's go to our stroke panel and let's increase the weight on that so we can kind of see this in action. So now I'm going to select my width tool and I'm going to be able to go here on any of these points, and I can create points and anchor points at any time. So there's one here on the end and one on the other end. So let's go ahead. I'm going to click and hold my mouse and drag. I'm going to be able to extend that shape out at that particular anchor point. And then I can also go down here and extend that one out even further. So you can see kind of the multitude of shapes you can create with this when it comes to logo development and design. So at any point I can click along here and create an additional anchor point. So I can click here, kind of drag, and I can kind of make that a curve. I can make it convex or a concave shape, and I can continue to make this more detailed. Click here and I can continue to make a lot of different shapes. You can even make an airplane, a bird. I mean, there's so many different symbols you can create with this and be pretty creative. You can also, there's no limit to how many anchor points you can have, so you can make it as detailed as possible. You can of course take your shape and flip it, go ahead and reflect this, or you can flip it horizontally. So I'm just going to go to Object, Transform. I'm just going to rotate. I'm going to be doing that a lot in the class. Let's go ahead and rotate it by 90 degrees. And you can see how I've got like a little vase shape going on here. You can also change the end caps as well. I'm going to go down here to Stroke. And I'm just going to put a nice round cap on there. So that kind of rounded the caps of my line. So that you can see all these really interesting weird shapes you can create. But you can see how that can be powerful with doing symbols and different logo designs. So at any point, if I'm happy with a shape, right now it's just a line. It has not been, the object has not been expanded, or the path has not been outlined yet. So we're going to do that next. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select our line here, go to Object, Path. I'm just going to do a simple outline stroke. So I'm going to go Object, Path, Outline Stroke. It's going to go ahead and outline that object for me. So now I have the direct selection tool. You can see I have all my little anchor points. It's a final object. So let's try that again, but let's do kind of a practical real-world object that we would need. I'm thinking I want to do a shield for a logo, so I need to get this really cool shield. But what's hard about doing a shield is it's got to be equal on the left and right side. It's got to be symmetrical on both sides, and sometimes that's hard to do when you just grab the pen tool and start to trace away. So let's try to do a shortcut and do the width tool and see if we can create a very quick shield icon. So let's go ahead and grab our pen tool, and we're going to just go an up and down vertical stroke. Just make sure we flip that to stroke. Grab my width tool and let's create a shield graphic. Let's make sure it's even, the top and the bottom. And let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and grab something in the middle. If you look at kind of the shield shape, it's going to be kind of in this direction. And right there, we already have kind of a shield shape developing. Of course, we can change I have the very top point here, and I'm just dragging down, kind of give it a little bit of a point. And we can add characteristics to this shield. We can, make it any shape we want to. If we don't like what we just did, a little shortcut, Command Z, go back in time. I'm going to be using that a lot throughout this class, little Command Z shortcut. So you can see how you can create really cool shields, emblems, all that kind of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and tweak this a little bit. And there I am. I have my little shield logo. I'm going to go to Path, and I'm going to outline the stroke. So Object, Path, Outline, Stroke. And there I go. I have a perfectly symmetrical object I'm able to do a shield with. So another thing you can do with the width tool is you can play around with anything that's a path or a stroke. So I'm going to go ahead and get the ellipse tool. I'm just going to hold down Shift and make a perfect circle. And I'm going to flip it to a stroke. And now I can grab the width tool, and I can be able to pull on any of these points to thicken the stroke around the circle. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this and drag. And you can see I can make kind of a neat logo symbol with this. You can have different weights and thickness all throughout the object here. So just right there kind of created a really interesting shape. Let's go ahead and try that with, you could do it with anything. You could do star, you could do a wavy line. So let's say I'm just going to grab the pen tool and just do a couple of wavy lines here. I can even get the curvature tool, which we'll go over next, and kind of adjust the curves of the line. Okay, and now that it's a stroke, I can grab my width tool and play as I want to. So you can see I can make like a really neat brush looking shape, an object, and you can go back and change the width of any point. So just like that. You can also create leaves really easily. I know a lot of logos have leaves required, especially if you're working with an organic brand. This is a really great way to create that. So just similar to what we did, we can just kind of make kind of a little bit of a curve here. Grab that width tool, and we're going to create a leaf. And just like that, we have a nice leaf shape. We can go to Path, Outline, Stroke, and we can fine tune it. So Path, Outline, Stroke, and now we have access to all the different anchor points. For those that are already familiar with the curvature tool, great, you're one step ahead of the game. With this class, I do recommend you having a little bit of pen tool knowledge and you're kind of comfortable with creating things with the pen tool and kind of creating curves. But what's great about creating curves with the curvature tool is that's what it's meant for. It's a lot easier to create more rounded, circular shaped curves with the curvature tool than it is with just using the pen tool. So for an example, for a pen tool, I just want to create a circle. I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to try to do 45-degree angles. I'm going to try to get this circle to look good. Just clicking and holding just like you would with the pen tool. And then I'd have to go back with the direct selection tool and make a bunch of edits. And you can see how long that's taking me to create a nice, just smooth shape. So let's say I do it with just the curvature tool. I'm just going to go ahead and click here, click across the way, click up at the middle, push up. And then I can click down here and just look how nice that is. I just have to kind of edit a little bit, but it's so much easier to make these kind of perfectly round shapes. And in logo design, it's incredibly important to be able to have accurate, nice, smooth curves. So I'm going to be using this tool a lot in the class. So just practice with that curvature tool. And as we start to work on logos throughout the class, you can kind of see how I utilize this tool, and I'll kind of stop and kind of mention that I do use the curvature tool a lot more than the pen tool in some cases to kind of get those nice, smoother, much more natural looking rounded edges. So the next tool we're going to go over is the offset path tool, and if you haven't really played around with offset path, you can kind of see its power here in a minute. So that was the width tool in action. I wanted to go over that tool because I'm going to use it a lot in the class, and it just kind of is a great shortcut to create a lot of different shapes and objects that would normally take a lot of time. So I'm going to take that a step further and show you another tool. So we created this using the width tool, the little shield logo, and now we want to be able to create kind of an outline. So there's one thing we could do. We can create a little simple stroke here and make that a little bit bigger. We kind of have our stroke there. But what if we wanted to create a separate object? So we wanted to have that effect but without having it be a stroke. So there's one thing we can do to make that happen, and that is path outline, offset path. So we're going to go to Object, down to Path, and it's the Offset Path option. So this is what Offset Path does. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Preview. It's going to go ahead and extend it out by a particular amount. So right now I'm set in inches, and you may be in centimeters depending on where you live, but right now this is inches. So right now it's extending outside of the original path by 0.1389 inches, and you can change that as much as you want. You can even do negative as well if you want to go inside. So if I want to do a negative, you just click on negative, and now it's going to do it on the inside, which is kind of what we'd like. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, and so you can see how we already made this little extra item here. I'm going to take off the stroke on here. I'm going to make this a different color, so make it a little lighter so you guys can see. So you can see how we kind of created kind of a little bit of stroke effect. And we can continue to do this forever. We can click on this lighter gray option and go to Object, Path, and go to Offset Path. And let's do once again the same distance, and let's do a negative. So it's going to go on the inside just like that, and we're going to go ahead and make that lighter. And you can see when you do logo design how quick it is to kind of do that, because there's a lot of instances where you have kind of a shape and you want to be able to create this effect, but it's kind of a complicated shape, but it's kind of hard to redraw that on the inside. With the pen tool, we could just use this offset path tool, and it's a lot easier and it's more accurate. So the great thing about offset path is you can also work with it in typography. So you can increase and decrease the offset path to make kind of some neat shapes with the typography. And one practical way that you can use this is a lot of times when you have detailed backgrounds and you really want something, a logo to pop out in front of it, sometimes you have to use a white outline stroke around the lettering. And normally when you do this, you'd go ahead and have your typography here. I would maybe right click, I would create outlines. And then I would just add a simple stroke, and this is how you would do it if you didn't have the offset path tool. You'd increase the weight a little bit, and then you go, ooh, that doesn't look right. Then you go down to your align stroke panel, and instead of having a line stroke to center, you would then do a line stroke to the outside. So that's kind of the effect we're going for. We go to corner, maybe do a round join to make it nice and soft. just like that. But see, you can see how it's overlaying a little bit and covering up other characters in the words, and that's not really what we want to have. So this is where offset path will come in handy. So instead of adding a stroke, we're going to go ahead and null out the stroke. We're going to do the offset path, so we're going to go to Object, Path, Offset Path, and we're going to do a positive number, so we're not going to have a negative sign. We're going to do a preview, and that's a little much, so we're going to maybe cut that in half. Instead of a 0.1, we'll do a 0.05, and we're going to go ahead and preview that and see how we like it. I'm going to go ahead and click OK on that, and we are going to make it white. And we want to make sure it's a fill white, and we're going to put it in the background. And just like that, we kind of created that same effect as we did before, but this time we don't have any of the characters overlapping, and it looks like it's truly there. So we can always round the corners on this and give it a nice kind of sticker effect, kind of like the example I'm showing now. We can have a nice soft edges, and so you can kind of see where how messing around with typography can kind of have a really neat effect. I like using offset path to kind of create some really neat shapes with basic typography characters. So in this case, I'm using Azo Sans Black, and it's just a simple letter A, but I really want to make it my own letter A, something a little bit more unique. So I will need to create outlines, so I'm just going to right click, create outlines. So now I can go to Object, Path, and play around a little bit with the offset path tool to create something a little bit different. So right there I can kind of create that. I can make it a little bit bigger and click on OK, and so now I kind of have a really different shape. I'm going to ungroup this to have my original A, and I kind of have something a little bit different. I can continue to do offset path to create something really unique and do different kind of characters. I can also continue to do this and do path, offset path. I can just do it by a smaller margin, just like that, and I can flip that to a stroke, kind of add a nice border to it. I can then take this outside one. I'm just going to continue. I'm just playing around with this tool a little bit, and I can continue and continue, and you can create really neat effects, kind of the example that you see in the J there. Kind of you can keep going and create some neat things. So several times in the class we're going to use the offset path tool to create some unique characters and lettering, to take kind of your typical basic font and to make it something that has some character. For example, this logo that you've kind of seen in the theory lessons of the class, and kind of check that out. That's kind of how I created that, was using the offset path tool. Just another quick example of how I use offset path, and we'll be kind of doing this logo a little bit later in the class, but kind of wanted to show you how to create this little beveled look. Kind of looks a little bit more higher end, and we did that using a negative offset path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select both of these, and I went ahead and created outlines to the type, and then I'm going to go down to Object, Path, Offset Path. I am going to do a negative one, so just going to make sure I put a negative sign in front of the number, kind of see what that looks like, and you get a little preview of it. We go ahead and click on OK, and then I can change the kind of look of that. So you could do kind of something similar to what I have above, where you're kind of changing it a little bit in color so it has that really neat beveled look. So that's exactly how I kind of came up with this one. Let me go ahead and click. And sometimes you have to ungroup when you do an offset path. So right click ungroup, and then you can access these little individual things, and you can change the color to get the effect above. And so we'll be doing this logo a little bit later. We'll be drawing this little neat shape. We'll actually be using several of the tools we just went over to create the hat and the horns, and try to figure out how to think of concepts for different logo designs. So if you're not familiar with layering masks yet, you're going to be, because it's a very useful tool for adding the grunge effect, which is really neat for those kind of retro logos, the ones that are faded, maybe a little bit organic, kind of some of the ones we went over in the class, that grunge effect. So we're going to use the layering mask and kind of show you how I kind of created this effect that you're seeing on the screen. So here's some simple typography. It's Azo Sans Black. I'm just going to go ahead and create outlines. I'm just creating outlines. And I wanted to kind of add a little bit of softness to the edges, because right now it's kind of got some sharp points there. So I'm just going to kind of highlight everything. I'm getting my direct selection tool. I'm going to be doing this a lot in the class. and I'm going to be kind of, let me go ahead and see if I can select the first. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and you'll see these little points where I can be able to click and drag, and globally, all throughout everything I have selected, you can see how the curves are being changed as I shift this around. I'm just going to do a very slight curve, kind of just adds a little bit of softness to it. So I'm going to do that throughout to make sure I have kind of the look I'm going for this particular typeface. And so just a little tip when you're doing that kind of rounded edges effect, if you have different sized lettering and you try to do it, it's not going to allow you to. So you just need to select the similar sized type and do it all at one time. So I can do all of the word effect globally all at one time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right here. So you can see how I'm able to change all of it globally, just add a little softness. I wouldn't be able to select all of them and do it at the same time because they're different. They're going to be different angles on each one. So just did one word at a time, have my nice rounded edges or corners, and I'm ready to go ahead and apply an effect to this. So right now we just have black. I'm going to go ahead and show you a great resource. The link is in the resource guide. These are some fantastic little grunge. These are actually JPEGs. These are just like photos. So you could really do this with any photo. And you can also do it with vector as well. You don't have to just put a photo on there. You can actually get vector grunge textures, or you could do geometric patterns, anything you want to overlay on top of your text. So I'm going to go ahead and group this together. So I'm just going to right click and group them all together. I'm going to take the texture that I downloaded from this resource. Here it is. It's just a simple JPEG, nothing too complicated. I'm just going to kind of size it up. Okay. And one thing I want to do is I want to put it on the top layer. So we want to always have the texture be on the top and what we want to punch out on the bottom. So I have the texture on the top. I'm going to go ahead and select all of it. I'm going to go over to my transparency panel right here, and I'm going to click on Make a Mask, and it's going to go ahead and adapt it and make a layer mask right here on the right. So this is our layer mask. Right now it's linked right here to our grunge effect typography. So you can see how it kind of overlaid that particular texture over top of the text. There's also a really neat kind of option here if you want to go for a really destroyed look. You can go ahead and invert the mask, and anything that's black is going to be white, and everything that's white is going to be black. So it's going to really reverse kind of the texture here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Invert Mask, and you can see how it really kind of accentuates a lot of those darker areas. So you can always just click back off of it and go back. And so you can try that with a lot of different textures. There's also vector grunge textures. You can even make your own texture, which we're going to do here in just a moment as a little bonus exercise, and then apply it over our type. So before we go and create our own texture for this, we are going to go ahead and use this and finish this up. I want to create a nice wave in this so it just doesn't look like straight text. It has a little bit of curves in it. So that's another tool I'm going to be able to show you that I use quite a bit, and it's going to go down to Effect and go down to Warp. And so these are really great warp options when you come with typography. You got to be careful not to overuse them, to use them subtly so you have a nice realistic effect. So for this one, I kind of want to have a wave effect or a flag effect. So let's go ahead and try the wave. And that seems to work really good, but see how it kind of warps it a little bit. I want to kind of have, I believe, the flag effect would probably be what I'm looking for. So that's okay. We just go down to warp. Let's go to flag, and we don't want to have such a dramatic effect, so we're just going to turn the dial down a little bit. We just want a little bit of a subtle curvature, just like that, kind of a neat wave. We can go ahead and change the color on all this as well. We can have a nice pop of orange. Let's make this a bright orange. Gonna right click, arrange, sending that to the back layer. And we can click on this. Let's say I want to change the color. Right now it's gray. So we have our transparency. Anytime you want to edit or look at your layering mask, you're going to bring up the transparency panel. So here's our layering mask right here. This is how we affect this. So if I have this selected, I can go ahead and shift around this texture to how I like it. So you may have a different position you want to put the photo on to have the right grunge effect that you're looking for. But to go ahead and edit the actual text again, we need to click right back to this layer. That's kind of the trick. And I'm going to change this to maybe a dark blue, maybe a deep blue or purple, and then kind of change the coloring on this just a little bit more. Just doing some tweaks. And we have kind of a neat effect. So that's kind of how I went about adding the texture, adding a little bit of a wave, which you can go to Effect and go to Warp and do all sorts of different types of kind of wave effects, because you kind of see a lot of logos do that where they kind of have that wave and flow, and you wonder how they do that. Some people do it by hand, but I think that's quite a lot to do. And you got to get grids and get it all working. But if you wanted to kind of create that effect quickly, just make sure you just go to warp and you'll be able to do these kind of little effects quickly. So let's create our own texture, because we maybe want to use a vector one. For whatever reason, we want to create our own, and we can practice that layering mask one more time. We're going to do that right here real quick. So we're going to be creating our own texture. There's several ways we can do this. To get the grunge effect that you see here, you probably need to find something with a photo, because it's really, really hard to get all these little details and have it remain in vector. It can almost break your computer if you start to create a texture that's too complicated, that has too many anchor points. So sometimes that's when photos or really, really high-res JPEGs really come in handy with creating the grunge effect, because using the vector version of that really, really slows down your computer. So as you're starting to create your own vectorized little patterns or kind of this grunge effect to have as layering masks, if your computer starts to crash or get really slow, that's very common. Even my computer has issues. So that's why sometimes using a JPEG resource is not a horrible idea to achieve that effect. But just if you're curious and you want to know how, I have this little brush here, paintbrush tool. You can do all sorts of different ones. You can even do the pencil tool. Maybe let's try the pencil tool for this one, because I like nice thin lines. And it's going to look absolutely ridiculous, but I'm just scribbling. I'm just trying to get a more natural, gritty kind of texture, just kind of going around. It just looks absolutely ridiculous. And I'm going to let go. And right now I don't really have a stroke on, so I'm going to make sure I have a black color. You can choose whatever color you'd like. Flip it to a stroke. And what I like to do is fairly thin strokes for the effect we're going to do. So I'm going to go down to stroke, and I'm going to make it a pretty thin stroke. And right there I can take that and make that as a layering mask. Or we can go up to effect, and we can go and do a couple of these warp tools, or we can go to distort and transform, which will take this and really distort this stroke and do all sorts of crazy things to it. And that's what we want to have with a crazy grunge texture. So we could do a pucker and bloat and kind of see what that looks like. So let's do a pucker or a bloat, and you can see kind of some crazy effects that you get. You can see how slow your computer starts to get. I'm going to continue to mess with distort, maybe do roughen. Roughen's kind of a neat texture. Ooh, that's kind of neat. So there we go. That's crazy. And I bet if I go even crazier, wow, look at that. So let's not do it quite as crazy, and let's add more detail to that. There we go. Let's go ahead and click on OK. Let's see what smooth looks like. And this is a true experimentation. Any combination of these destroy, distort, roughen, you can create all sorts of different combinations. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. There's kind of our homemade texture. Looks a little bit crazy, doesn't it? But we're going to apply this as a layering mask. So let's say I want to release this mask. I don't want this one anymore. All you have to do is press the release button, and boom, you got that released. And it's going to go ahead and show the picture released. Okay, so there's our picture, or we can just either slide it out of the way or delete it if we don't want it anymore. And you can see how slow my computer is, because anytime you have this complicated vector, all these anchor points that the computer is trying to load, it gets really, really slow. So don't be surprised if your laptop or your desktop cannot handle this. So here we are. One thing I can do is right now it's set on a path. So one thing to maybe simplify this little kind of homemade texture is just to go to Object, Path, and we can outline the stroke. So that's going to outline all the little strokes. It might make it a little bit easier for the computer to handle it. It took about 5 minutes, but my computer finally outlined the stroke on this. So now I'm ready to apply it. I have it on the top, over top of the type. Let me go ahead and position it how I want. You can see how complicated that is. That is hugely complicated. That's all in vector. That's probably a million different anchor points. Let's go ahead and select both of our graphics, and we're going to apply it just like we did a JPEG, and we're going to click on Make Mask in the Transparency panel, and let's kind of see what this looks like. Okay, so there we go. That's kind of our little grunge effect that we created. I kind of like the other one a little bit better, but it was fun to kind of see what that would look like. So that's the grunge effect. So I'm just kind of going over some tools that we'll use quite often in this class. If you've taken some of my other classes, you most likely use the Shape Builder tool outside of the Width tool. The Shape Builder tool is probably one of my most used tools when we're creating symbols for logo marks. So this is how the Shape Builder tool works. If you already know how the Shape Builder tool works, go ahead and skip this lesson. You're good to go. This is going to be the very basics here. So I'm going to create a simple ellipse tool. So I'm just going to do a simple circle. Let's go ahead and get that filled in with the color. And let's say I want to combine. You can combine and subtract shapes really easily using this tool. So let's say I grab another circle. Let's make that a different color. And I want to subtract the space that's created with these two shapes. So let's say I want to create a subtraction of that. I'm going to go ahead and highlight both of these items. That's important. You got to highlight all your items you want to work with the Shape Builder tool. And the Shape Builder tool is going to be right here. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. There's the Shape Builder tool. I'm going to go ahead and select that. So as you hover over, it's going to give you options to select. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a subtraction. So if I don't press anything, you see that addition sign is going to add. I can click on this and I can add those two shapes together as one shape, which can be very handy when you're doing complex logo design symbols. So let's say I want to subtract. I can hold down the Alt or the Option key and I have this little negative symbol. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. You can kind of see what that looks like. And I could subtract any of these items. So if I want to subtract that, I can. Or if I want to subtract this middle one, I hold down the Option key and I click and I can subtract. So that's kind of how the Shape Builder tool works. We could create a very simple graphic here using the Shape Builder tool so we can get a little bit of practice. So let's say we want to build a little cute robot for a particular brand or a logo mark. So we're just going to use just these basic shapes and create kind of a more complicated little symbol just using the Shape Builder tool. So I have just the rectangle tool. I'm just going to draw the body and I'm going to go down and kind of round these corners out a little bit and then do the little body here. I'm going to do the rectangle tool. Let me go down to the rounded rectangle tool so I can just go ahead and get that effect right off the bat. And I can always change the effect of the rounded corners. Here's a little robot. Let's say we want to have different objects here. Let's say we want to have a little bit of piping between his neck. So we're going to do that. Just round that off. And here's another little shortcut trick that I'll be using throughout the class. I'm going to select an object, hold down the Option key and drag, and you can duplicate. Just holding down the Option key and dragging. And it's a quick way to duplicate instead of having to sit there and copy and paste and copy and paste. So I'm going to hold down Option, drag, and I just replicated that. So let's go ahead and draw the outline of the little robot here. We can always, once again, if this was a complicated shape and we wanted to have an outline of this, I could just go to Object, Path, Offset Path, do a negative, and just like that I have that shape created. Make it white so you can see how quick that was to make. I can make little eyeballs, make that green. I'm going to hold down the Option key and drag and get our little option here. We can of course add little details. I can go, instead of having to copy and paste the circle and make it a little bit bigger to add kind of a stroke effect, I go to Object, Path, Offset Path, do an addition. So I'm going to take away the subtraction sign, make it a little bit bigger, and click OK. So now I can make these white. And there we go. I just had a little stroke there. You can also just do a stroke, but once again, sometimes with complicated objects, strokes don't always work, but sometimes they can. Kind of change the shape of the body here, make it a little more balanced. Okay, we can just kind of click and drag since I already like the shape, create little legs, or we can just go ahead and copy and paste these little items here. I can just do an Option, drag, and then I can just do Option, drag. So we have our little guy here, not too exciting, but just kind of showing you what we could do here. So here's what I did to kind of create that shape. So you can go down and you can just do one of them. You could do all of them right here. Or you can go up here to the shape option up here and you could just change one side. So as long as these are all linked, so those are all linked, all the sides are going to change together. But let's say I just want that top corner to be rounded. You can unlink it, and I'm just going to do this top right corner right here, and I'm just going to increase it to kind of create a little bit of a shoe there. And then I can just copy and paste this or do Option drag and reflect it. So just go to Object Transform, and I'm just going to reflect. I use that a lot. I use reflect a lot when I'm trying to do symmetrical type of designs. Zoom out, there's our little robot. We could do arms, we can go all detailed, but we'll just kind of maybe add some buttons. All right, so there's our robot. So how do we use the Shape Builder tool to punch all this out? Because right now, if I were to draw a background, let's say it's a dark blue background, I'm going to right click, send this all the way to the back layer. So right now we have a problem because we have this white. We really want that to be punched out. We want that to show the background behind it. So this is where the Shape Builder tool really comes in handy. We can make this kind of one object and fuse it all together. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to start with the top. So we're going to have our main shape here. So with the Shape Builder tool, you want to select all objects that you want to be involved. So I'm going to go ahead and select the entire head. And then I'm going to go grab my Shape Builder tool. And I'm going to be able to punch out some things. So I'm going to hold down Option or Alt, and I'm going to punch out the eyes and punch out this. So you can see how I was able to make kind of punch that out. It's all transparent there, which works really nice as a logo symbol. And same thing for this. Let me make sure I reduce that a little bit. And a lot of times with the Shape Builder tool, it doesn't like strokes very much. So what we can do is just go to Object, Path. We could just outline the path or outline the stroke there. And we can go ahead and select everything we want to be involved. So just the body. And then we're going to get the Shape Builder tool. I'm going to punch all these white portions out just like we did the head. Just like that. And eventually, let me go ahead and make this white. There's a little robot symbol. So eventually we want to join all these together because right now they're separate elements. For right now, you could just simply right click and group. And you have yourself an element here. But let's say I want to fuse this all as one object. For whatever reason, we want to create a stroke or a drop shadow or something where we really need them all together. You can join and fuse all those together with the Shape Builder tool. I'm not holding down Option because I want to add. This is addition. And all I am is going to select all the little objects here, select them all, and there we go. It's building a shape. So, there's a lot of different things you can do with the Shape Builder tool. There's our little robot we created. We're able to punch all those little items out, which comes in handy because you never want to have to use white ink if you don't have to. You want to reduce the amount of colors that you have to use. You can also use the Shape Builder tool with typography. So I have this little active typography here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to create outlines. I'm going to select both objects, both the background and the green test kind of lettering. I'm going to go to my Shape Builder tool and I'm just going to hold down Option. I can subtract lettering from that black box. And so now I have this. So let's go ahead and show you an example of what this is doing. So now it's transparent underneath. And so I can arrange, send that to back so you can kind of see how I was able to kind of punch that out a little bit with the type. So you can see how handy all these different tools put together. If you master the width tool, the Shape Builder tool, the offset path tool, the grunge effect, and using our layering mask, if you can kind of really get comfortable with what we went over in this section, you'll have pretty much all the basic tools and knowledge you need to create all the logos we're going to create in the rest of the class. So now that we have just some basics, we got everything set up, we kind of went over some basic tools, we're ready to create our first fully fledged logo. So one of the first little icons we're going to develop here, or Logomark, we're going to do this interesting bee that kind of uses a gradient overlay style. It's got a lot of pop of colors, got some layers to it. It's a little more dynamic than what you would see with a flat logo design. But I'm going to show you how I created this using a wide variety of tools. So let's go ahead and get started. We're just going to get our type tool, and hopefully you're pretty good with your type tool by now. And I'm going to go ahead and increase this bee quite a bit. And this is just Azo Sans Black. I'm using that a lot because it's got some nice thick kind of lines to it. It's a nice chunky font, which works really, really well with this particular style. So one thing I want to do is I want to make sure I create outlines before I kind of customize this any further. So I'm going to go ahead and create outlines. And what I want to do is I want to fill in these little holes. These are called closed counters in typography terms. Closed counter is anything that's kind of totally enclosed by a letter. So this would be a closed counter. So I'm just going to fill that in to kind of give us more of a chance for our gradient style to kind of come through. So I'm just covering those up. And this is what's so great about that shape builder tool. I can select everything, grab it, and just go ahead and get that as one unit. So there's my bee. Of course, I can always take the curvature tool and mess around with maybe the quality of the bee if I wanted to do anything with the quality in terms of, you know, kind of how it's curving and bending if I wanted to make it my own shape, but I'm pretty happy with how it is right now. I wouldn't mind rounding the corners a little bit there, so I'm just going to select the direct selection tool, kind of zoom in and just kind of get some soft corners being created here. This kind of helps make it a little bit more softer and more contemporary. I can even make it a little more dramatic. So there's our bee. So next we're going to go ahead and grab our gradient tool, and we're going to be able to apply a neat gradient. There's actually two different ways you can have gradients in this case, and one is a brand new tool that was launched in the 2019 version of the Adobe Illustrator, and that's the freeform gradient right here. I'm going to go ahead and select my object. It's right here in this icon. If you were to select this in your gradient panel or your gradient window and then click, you're able to create lots of different points of color, and the color actually radiates from that particular point. You can see how you can really create some neat gradient effects using this tool. Then you can actually shift them around. You can drag this and make the radius a little bit bigger or smaller depending on what you want to do. And you can create as many points as you like. And this is a fantastic way to add gradients. If you do not have the updated version of Adobe Illustrator, that's okay, because there's another way to add gradients. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this over here. The gradient mesh tool can be found right here in your toolbar. If you do not see this little icon right here, go ahead and go to your edit toolbar and you'll be able to drag that in. But this is the other way. If you don't have the updated version, you would probably need to go ahead and do gradient meshes. So let's just make this a solid color once more and get our gradient mesh tool, and we can click anywhere on here and it's going to add a mesh. So we're going to click here and it kind of adds this mesh or anchor point that I can adjust. Similar to the last tool, but you're a little bit more, you have a little bit more control over kind of the bends and arcs of the colors. So to change the colors is not quite as intuitive as the freeform gradient tool, but you're going to select a anchor point and you're going to go ahead and pick the color. And you're going to do that for all these different anchor points. You can't change colors quite as quickly as you can using the other tool, so that's probably why they came up with it. But this is a great alternative though if you do not have the updated version of Adobe Illustrator. And what I like to do when I use the gradient tool is I like to add kind of the illusion of highlights and shadows, and sometimes the illusion of 3D by putting maybe some of your darker shades on the corners or the bottom and having some highlights kind of on the upper quadrant. It makes it feel a little bit more realistic, a little bit more engaging. So there's kind of our bee, two different bees we have going on with our gradient mesh tool and our freeform gradient tool. So two great gradient tools that you could use. If you ever want to modify any of these anchor points, just go ahead and select them and you can go ahead and twist these around however you'd like it to flow. I just took about a minute or two and kind of edited the gradient a little bit to make them less contrast of colors, kind of make it a little bit more smooth in appearance. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it out kind of in this example, how we're going to create all these kind of overlapping shapes. It looks like a very dynamic bee. So how we're going to do that is we're going to draw shapes on top of it and punch them out using the shape builder tool. So this is how we're going to do it. So let's go ahead and draw our first one. Let's kind of draw a line that goes all the way down here, just like a little circular line here. And we're going to switch that to a different color in a stroke so you can kind of see how it's going to overlap. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this on top so that we can be able to cut this shape out. So I'm going to put this on the top, arrange, send to front, make that a fill. I'm going to select this copy that we have and this image. And we're just going to go to that shape builder tool. We're going to punch this out. So we're going to punch this excess out and trim it up. And then now we have kind of a little dynamic shape that can cut into our bee. We can easily take the eyedropper tool and sample it, and then we can go back and edit the gradient and change how we need it if we wanted to go ahead and sample kind of a different lighter color. So we can go ahead and double click if we wanted to sample that lighter color. We take the little eyedropper tool and we can go ahead and sample it so it can keep the same color palettes going here. And I'm going to sample that darker color and maybe that we can move that out or keep that there. So that's kind of a way to add a little bit of a dynamic punch. Let's add another shape. Let's just cut this across this way, and now I'm able to highlight that as well. Go to the Edit Gradient tool and kind of mess around with the colors. So you're bringing kind of the highlights close, bumping up against kind of the low lights here behind it to kind of give it the layered look. So I'm deciding just to stick with one shape for now because I think that the simplicity of that looks a little bit more beautiful, a little bit more, on trend. And just you can see kind of how we started out. It's looking nothing like how we originally intended. And that is what experimentation is all about. So there we go. There's our little bee shape. Of course, we can continue to tweak the colors as we see fit. And if you ever want to delete a color, you just highlight it and you delete it. And you could do the same thing with the gradient mesh tool. If you don't have access to it, it's going to be a little bit of the same way. You're going to add your little gradient mesh points. That's a little bit more cumbersome to use, but it still works as a tool. So I'm going to continue to kind of mess with this a little bit, maybe add some highlights and shadows and see what we can come up with. As you can see, using the shape builder tool, some of the gradient tools, you can really create a whole series of these things, a series of letters or series of symbols, and you don't have to use just typography. You can use shapes and circles and all sorts of things. And this is kind of more of the abstract logo style, which might fit for your client, it might not, but we're going to pretty much cover a lot of the different styles throughout this class. And so this was just kind of a way to introduce this style and this effect using gradients. Next, we're going to try our hand at creating a little tree logo that has some some really contemporary flat icon design, very clean and simple, just using simple strokes and shapes in Adobe Illustrator. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to kind of get our leaf going. I'm just going to get the circle tool or the ellipse tool here and begin. I'll go ahead and put my gradient tab away. I'm not going to be using gradients. It's going to be flat design, no gradients allowed. So I'm just going to kind of do my leaf here, which doesn't look much like a leaf, but that can change. So we can take our little curvature tool. If we double click on the curvature tool, it's going to switch to a sharp edge, and if we double click, it's going to switch back. So if you're not already familiar with kind of that aspect, so that's all I did to kind of create that leaf shape. Switch it back to a stroke. I'm going to make it a nice thick stroke, but let's go ahead and make it a little bit smaller first. And then get our stroke, probably keep our stroke panel out since we'll be doing a lot of stroke work. What I like to do, instead of doing harsh black, sometimes I like to design simple flat icons and kind of a little bit of a medium to dark gray. For some reason, it kind of helps my mind view color, and I don't like to design with color right away sometimes when I'm still drawing symbols. So somehow like doing this lighter gray seems to be kind of helps me view it with color, even though I'm not actually using color. Just kind of, because this is so harsh, not all the colors we're ever going to use in this logo are going to be as harsh as black. So light gray kind of helps your eye kind of design a little bit better, thinking about the future when this is going to be in color. So I'm going to click on OK, and we can add little ornaments to the leaf. So I'm just going to zoom in really tight here, just taking our pen tool. I'm going to do like a little pill shape. So I'm just going to go over to my stroke panel and do a nice round cap and give it kind of that look. And I want to kind of get a little bit of a thinner weight there. Just hold down Option. I'm going to duplicate that going up. And we can go ahead and adjust all of these endpoints to kind of go more toward the center of the leaf. And what I can do if I want everything to be exact, we can just change one of these to get the right angle, make sure that's in the center, and then now I can duplicate. A lot of times in logo design, I see a lot of my students struggle with this concept, so I really wanted to make sure I brought it up, is they'll do this really great detailed logo design, but they make the strokes really thin, so when you zoom out, you kind of lose the details of the logo. So every logo, see the little leaf right now, that needs to be, all the details need to be seen from about this distance or about that size. So that's going to make the logo really flexible and adaptable. We kind of covered this a little bit in the strong logo design characteristics lesson. So when in doubt, try to have a little bit of a thicker stroke if you can, if you're going to have thin lines. So let's go ahead and do just that. Let's go ahead and make the thickness a little bit thicker, and we could start to kind of mess with shapes and details. So let's go ahead and zoom in, and I want to have like a nice rounded edge here, so I'm just going to take the direct selection tool, kind of round that edge, that little bit of a top, to give it a soft look. I can even take the curvature tool and double click down here on this bottom to kind of make it more of a sharp edge like you would see on a traditional leaf. And I can even take the width tool and kind of change the widths of these caps here, so I can just kind of make them slightly smaller. So just continuing to work on this, and kind of maybe added a little fourth little vein there on that sign, and we could do a little bit of coloring. One thing we could do is we can copy and paste this, and since that's a stroke, I could switch that to a fill, so that's going to be easy to fill out. Going to send that to the back, and we can make this any kind of green color we'd like. So let's go ahead and find a green color that's nice and vibrant. We'll go ahead and take this, we can go ahead and do path. And if we want to have that thickness, we can. This is the time where we can adjust that. Maybe do something in the middle, maybe 3.5. And then we could just go to path, outline our stroke, and then we can kind of change this. And this also needs to be outlined, these paths. So I'm just going to go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke, and let's go ahead and adapt the same green color, but let's make it a little bit of a shade darker to kind of add some dark hues there. So there's kind of our leaf icon that we did fairly quickly. Since the paths are outlined, I can go ahead and kind of change this how I'd like. I can group it together. I can duplicate it by holding down Option and dragging. I can reflect it so it has the exact opposite side, and you can see how you can create quite a wide variety of things this way.